Chapter 2, The Man Behind the Posting. I am Bryce of the Cinder Archive, and this is Chapter 2, The Man Behind the Posting. 5 strangers found the same notice yesterday and answered it without knowing whose name belonged behind it. A clerk knew. She'd called it another one of Sterling's messes and said nothing more, the way you'd mention a neighbor's leaking roof. Common knowledge, no further explanation required. A runner came for them at the exchange and said only, "He'll see you now. Now we find out who he is." The workshop door doesn't creak so much as exhale, a long hiss of pressure equalizing, brass hinges sighing open onto a room that looks less like it was built and more like it accumulated, one half-finished idea at a time. Blueprints cover every flat surface and several vertical ones. A prosthetic arm, disassembled at the elbow, sits propped against a stool like it's resting between shifts. Somewhere out of sight, a pressure valve hisses its slow, patient complaint, and the air carries solder smoke and oil in a combination that smells, somehow, like ambition. A man straightens up from a work table scattered with brass filings, wipes his hands on a rag that has clearly given up trying to clean anything, and turns to face 5 strangers with the unbothered delight of someone greeting old friends he simply hasn't had time to call. "There you are." He says it like he's been waiting for them specifically, rather than for whoever happened to answer an unsigned posting. I'd apologize for the mess. But if I started apologizing for the workshop, I'd never get to the part where I apologize for everything else, and we'd be here all week. Nobody answers right away. He doesn't seem to mind. "Garrick Sterling," he says by way of introduction, though half of them have already pieced that together. "Most people call me Geary. The Gearwright Hall calls me a liability with excellent test results." I'd say they're both right. He says this lightly, the practiced lightness of a joke worn smooth from overuse, and his eyes move across the 5 of them in turn. Quick, assessing, charming, even in the act of assessing. Before he adds, almost as an afterthought. And before anyone asks, yes, the gossip about my personal life is mostly true, and no, it isn't relevant to why you're here. Probably. Senna straightens at that, the small, instinctive posture correction of someone meeting a name she's heard spoken with respect. "Hall. Pride," she says, half to herself. "Hall exasperation," Geary corrects. "But I'll take the compliment buried in there. Wick has already done the math the room invites. Good workshop, good coat, a man can afford to joke about his own reputation instead of managing it. None of that tells him what the job actually pays for, and that's the part he says out loud. You're spending a lot of charm before you've said a number. I like to lead with charm. Numbers come easier once people like you." Geary's grin doesn't waver, but something behind it recalibrates, filing Wick under the one who's going to ask the hard questions first. He's not wrong. Orsa says nothing at all. She's looking at the workshop the way she might look at a fire. Someone's built too close to dry brush. Not afraid of it exactly, just unconvinced it's been thought through. Geary catches the look and doesn't try to charm his way past it, which is, in its own way, the most charming thing he's done yet. Tamsin isn't looking at Geary at all. She's looking at the work table, at a half-finished hand, joints exposed, the kind of articulation work that takes most artificers a decade to manage, and Geary has apparently left lying around like a sketch. "Is that a 5-point wrist linkage?" she asks, before she's decided whether it's polite to ask. "It is." Geary's whole posture changes, just slightly. Less performance, more genuine pleasure at being asked the right question by the right person. You'd be the first person in this room to notice. Most people see a hand. You saw the joint. The joint's the interesting part. That, Geary says, is exactly the kind of thing I'd say, and exactly the kind of thing nobody wants to hear at a dinner party. Bram hasn't moved from the doorway. He's not unimpressed, not exactly. He's withholding the impression until he's decided whether it's earned. When Geary's attention finally lands on him, expecting some reaction to match the others, Bram simply asks the question the rest of the room has been circling without saying. If this is just embarrassing, why pay this well? The room's energy shifts. Not dramatically, but enough. Geary's grin doesn't drop, but it does something subtler, the kind of recalibration a good performer makes mid-sentence rather than mid-pause. Because embarrassment, handled badly, becomes a much more expensive problem than embarrassment handled well. Ask any hallmaster who's ever had to explain a missing prototype to the Crown's auditors. He spreads his hands, workshop stained and entirely sincere looking. I'd rather pay well now than pay worse later. Call it preventative spending. It's a good answer. It's also, Bram notes, filing it away rather than challenging it outright. Not actually an answer to the question he asked. The second work table is cleaner, which seems to be the point. Geary unrolls a map across it. Sky Pirate territories sketched in faded ink, annotated in a handwriting too cramped to be anyone's but his own. And the room's energy settles from charm into business, the particular shift that happens when everyone in a conversation decides, more or less simultaneously, to get to the actual point. Here's what's true, Geary says, and his voice drops half a register, businesslike without losing its warmth. One of my designs went missing. A prototype. Call it a rogue unit, since that's more or less what it is. It's dangerous in the wrong hands, which is most hands, frankly, and it needs to be found, recovered, and destroyed, along with anything that might let someone reverse engineer what made it work. All of it. No partial credit. Destroyed, Senna repeats. Not returned to the hall? Returned to me, Geary says, which is, in this specific case, the same thing as destroyed, because I'll be the one doing the destroying. I'd rather not have anyone official looking too closely at a prototype that was never supposed to leave this workshop in the first place. He taps the map, redirecting before the question can grow a second question behind it. Your first lead's better than the question anyway. There's a Sky Pirate captain operating along this stretch of the rift's edge, flying with thruster tech nobody's seen before. Faster, hotter, running, built different. That smell, to me, smells like someone got their hands on something they shouldn't have. How different? Tamsin asks, already leaning toward the map. Different enough that I'd like you to look at it before anyone else does. Geary's pen taps once against the table, an idle habit rather than a deliberate gesture, ink-dark fingers drumming a rhythm that doesn't quite match the easy confidence in his voice. Find the captain, confirm the tech, bring back whatever you can without burning the ship down around it, if you can manage that. I'll cover passage, supplies, and the kind of money that makes Hall-tier coin look modest. And if the Crown asks questions, Wick says, watching him closely, about an unregistered job recovering unregistered Magitech, they won't ask you. They'll ask me, and I have a very practiced face for exactly that conversation. Geary smiles, and it's a good smile, but Wick's noticed by now that the good smiles come fastest right after the questions he likes least. You have plausible deniability. I have years of experience being the answer nobody wants to hear twice. There's a beat where the room does its own private accounting, Senna weighing the shape of a real mission against the shapeless purpose she walked in with, Wick weighing the money against the size of the gap he can feel under Geary's answers without yet being able to name it, Orsa weighing whether this is worth more of her time than the logging dispute waiting for her elsewhere. Tamsin already 3 questions deep into the mechanics of thruster tech that runs hotters. Bram, simply watching, arms crossed, waiting to see if anyone else is going to ask the obvious thing twice. Nobody does. Mostly, Bryce suspects, because the money is good and the question, asked once, has already gotten the only answer it's going to get today. We'll need details on the captain, Senna says instead. Last known position, crew size, anything. Now that, Geary says, visibly relieved to be back on solid, technical ground, I have plenty of. The conversation moves, the way conversations about logistics do, toward the edges of the room, toward crates and supply manifests, and a second, smaller map Geary produces with the satisfaction of a man who's finally found the part of the meeting he actually enjoys. Tamsin drifts the other way. It isn't a decision so much as a pull, the kind of motion that happens before the reason for it catches up. There's an alcove off the main workshop floor, half curtained by a canvas tarp gone gray with dust, and under the tarp, just visible at the edges, just enough to suggest shape, is something built roughly like a man, and not at all like one. A suit frame, old by the look of the rust feathering its joints, abandoned the way old prototypes get abandoned, not thrown away, just outgrown, left to gather dust until someone decides whether it's worth the trouble of either repairing or scrapping. She doesn't touch it. She doesn't need to. The scar along her forearm, the one her instructor noticed yesterday, the one she spent years not explaining to anyone, including herself, gives a single faint pulse of heat, there and gone before she can be sure she felt it at all. Not pain. Not quite recognition either. Something closer to a held breath finally exhaling in a room she didn't know she'd been holding it in. She doesn't say anything. There isn't anything to say yet. No sentence that would make sense of a feeling this size and this small at once. A held breath about a stranger's old, abandoned machine. She just stands there a moment longer than she means to, looking at rust and canvas and the suggestion of a shape, until Geary's voice, light, easy, perfectly timed, calls the group's attention back toward the supply crates on the workshop's far side. When she turns, he's already looking at her. Not for long, just long enough that she can't be sure whether she imagined it. A lot of old projects in here, he says, to the room generally. Already moving, already redirecting. Most of them not worth the dust they're collecting. Come on. I want to show you the kit I've put together before you decide you don't trust my packing list. Tamsin follows. She says nothing. The twinge fades the way it always does, leaving behind nothing but the small private unease of not knowing what just happened, and not yet having anyone to ask. The route out of the workshop proper runs through a corridor. Tamsin hasn't noticed on the way in, narrower than the main floor, lined with doors that range from ordinary to unremarkable. Storage, she assumes, more clutter waiting its turn to become a project. One door isn't like the others. It's heavier, for one thing. The kind of door built for a purpose rather than simple convenience. No markings, no nameplate, nothing to suggest what's behind it beyond the fact that someone clearly didn't want a casual visitor wandering through. A thin seam of cold air leaks from beneath it, carrying with it a faint, sharp smell, like a storm about to break. Ozone, the kind that gathers around overworked ward work. And from somewhere behind the metal, low and steady, comes a hum that doesn't match the workshop's other ambient noise at all. Geary doesn't stop walking. He doesn't even slow, not obviously. His pace through that stretch of corridor simply happens to pick up by half a step. His attention simply happens to land on something he wants to point out 3 doors further down. His voice simply happens to fill the air with commentary about supply routes at exactly the moment anyone might otherwise have asked what's behind door number, however many. It's smooth. It's practiced. It would work on almost anyone. Bram notices anyway, not because the deflection is clumsy, but because Bram has spent enough years around officers who managed rooms for a living to recognize the shape of management even when it's well executed. He doesn't say anything. He just slows his own steps a half beat longer than the rest of the group, long enough to register the cold seam of air and the wrongness of that hum against the rest of the workshop's noise, and files it next to the other thing he's already filed. Embarrassment, handled badly, becomes expensive. That's not an answer either. It's a pattern. Orsa notices too, in her own way, less the door itself than the practiced ease of being steered past it, the particular discomfort of recognizing someone managing your attention without seeming to manage anything at all. She's seen that skill before, in conclave liaisons smoothing over disputes they'd rather not litigate honestly. She doesn't trust it any more here than she does there. Neither of them says anything. The corridor ends, the workshop proper opens up around them again, and whatever's behind that door stays exactly where Geary clearly wants it to stay, unmentioned, unexplained, and, for now, unimportant enough not to be worth the fight of asking. The light's gone long in gold by the time they reach the workshop's outer door, the kind of late afternoon light that makes even cluttered brass look briefly, deliberately beautiful, catching dust motes and turning them to something almost decorative. Geary walks them out himself, which Senna notices and appreciates without quite being able to say why. Most people with his standing would have handed them off to an assistant by now. Instead, he lingers at the threshold, hand braced against the frame, watching them gather the last of the supply crates with the easy, satisfied attention of a man who's just closed a good deal and is enjoying the moment a little longer than strictly necessary. Go on then, he says, and there's real warmth in it, the kind that doesn't need to perform to land. Find me a captain and a very strange engine, and try not to die doing it. I'd take it personally. They're nearly through the door. Wick already counting supply crates, Senna already running the captain's last known position through her head, Orsa already thinking about how much daylight's left to put between herself and the city before evening. When Geary's voice catches up to them, and something in it has changed. Whatever you find out there, he says, and it isn't a joke this time, isn't wrapped in any of the easy charm from an hour ago. It isn't yours to keep. Bring it back to me. Don't let anyone study it. A pause, brief, almost imperceptible, the kind of pause that happens when a person hears their own voice say more than they meant it to. Please. The word lands wrong. Too small for the man who said it, too bare for the room they're standing in, the kind of please it that belongs to someone asking for something much larger than a returned prototype. Geary seems to hear it too. He laughs, half a beat too late, and reaches for the easy register he's worn the entire afternoon. Listen to me, practically begging. You'd think I actually cared whether you brought me back a thruster or just the dramatic story of how you lost it. Nobody answers that. There isn't really an answer that fits. The door closes behind them with the same long exhale it opened with, and the 5 of them stand a moment on the workshop steps, late light slanting gold across the street, none of them quite ready to be the first to say what they're all thinking. It's Senna, eventually, who breaks the silence, not with the word itself, but circling it. That was strange. Which part? Wick says. The job, the door we weren't allowed near, or the part where Etherglen's most charming man briefly forgot how to be charming. All of it, Orsa says, already walking. In roughly that order. Tamsin says nothing. She's still thinking about rust under canvas, and a scar that knows something she doesn't, and a "please" that sounded like it had been waiting a very long time to be said out loud. Behind them, in the workshop, the pressure valve hisses on into the gathering evening, patient as ever, keeping whatever secrets it's been keeping, long before any of them walk through that door.